Look down at your feet. Really. Now, unless you're watching this from home, maybe in the comfort of your bed or lying on the floor, most of us are wearing shoes. Whether it be heels, sports shoes, sneakers, boots, I would bet every person in this room is wearing a different pair. And isn't this the metaphor people always use when talking to us about the concept of empathy? It's funny, I can hear the echo of my 5th grade ethics teacher in the back of my mind when she would come up to us in class and say, "Ay, amores, pero pónganse los zapatos del otro." Put yourself in someone else's shoes. Actually take the time to understand what another person is going through at this moment. Think of all the people you see when walking down the street, maybe when looking at pictures hanging on the wall, or even when looking at me. It's hard to truly understand what another person is going through when we don't even know who they are. This is what empathy dares us to do. But I believe this is wrong. I believe we have been misled regarding the definition of empathy. We often mistaken it for feeling sorry or feeling pity for another person, trying to force those shoes onto our feet, hoping we're creative enough to make them fit and actually make it count when we're in them. You see, psychologists often divide empathy into 3 main types. First, there is cognitive empathy, which speaks of understanding another person. There's emotional empathy, feeling what the other person feels, and compassionate empathy, when understanding and feeling lead to action. And after all, what we need in this world are people who act. So perhaps this is the empathy we should be speaking of, the kind that not only builds better intentions, but actually builds better systems. I had this thought when I was sitting in my environmental systems and societies class. Now, at first, I clearly didn't think concepts such as empathy would come up as much as they did, but I was quickly proven wrong. You see, we were looking at the concept of sustainability, not just in the environment like we're always told, but in education, politics, social studies, and areas that I had never truly related this concept to. And the more we learned and understood that empathy is a system's ability to regenerate its resources and maximize their potential, aka a long-term solution, I began wondering why we didn't implement this to major policy and decision-making that we see being taken around the world. Why have educational policies, such as the No Child Left Behind, ended in criticism rather than actual progress? Why was the BR 163 highway built in the heart of the Amazon without investigating or caring about the environmental repercussions? I believe the answer is in a key word that has always fascinated me: realities. Why do we not consider them important? Isn't understanding another person's reality the very basis of empathy? Oh, right, but empathy isn't important to making big economic decisions and building highways. It's been labeled as too emotional, perhaps something destined for women or 5th grade ethics lessons. But what is the reality that our world is living in? Haven't we all felt that somehow, in some way, there have been systems created for us, but without taking into account our lives, our emotions, our situations? We feel it when we're sitting in class and there's an overwhelming amount of homework load, or when we're in the car and the music pounds loudly despite the fact we've told our siblings over and over again that it gives us a headache. Think of something as simple as dinner time in a busy household. Everybody's expected to sit down at the table at 7 p.m. sharp. No phones, no excuses. However, life is so much more than these simple rules that we often place. Sometimes we realize somebody at the table isn't present, doesn't want to be there. Perhaps because of work, college, school, traffic, cleaning. There are so many external factors that affect our realities in ways we do not even comprehend. And because of this, I have realized that they may be mundane. Rules, habits, routines that don't consider people's changing lives. Now, this is the same oversight that we see in major systems around the world. Healthcare, education, governments, systems that are intended to include us, but don't actually take into account our reality. And of course, to solve this, we must step into each other's shoes. But we must also look to take that next step, actually go beyond and take a first step towards change. And change cannot be initiated when we look at it from a negative perspective, something that happens all too often when speaking of the concept of empathy. Now, we all have those constant fights in our household or with our parents. And if there's one I always have with my dad, it's regarding my attitude. Now, it's funny because it's taken me being upset about Saturday lunch outings, hiding in a corner when people come over, and losing a really close friendship to understand why having a negative outlook can be so damaging on our realities. And when other people want to step into each other's shoes, they always connect it with pity, feeling sorry for the other person's reality and bracing themselves for the, quote, worst case scenario. However, empathy doesn't always have to lead us down this path. In fact, if our purpose is to actually come up with new, innovative solutions and help others, looking at it from a negative perspective will only drive us farther away from sustainable conclusions. If we actually want to make a change, we must believe that there is a chance. And many people genuinely want to believe in this chance and take that first step. However, they also face the issue that they don't see empathy as a catalyst for real problem solving. And because of this, we have also noticed that it's because people think empathetic decisions are always illogical, simply because they are emotional. However, since when did we decide that an emotional decision cannot also be a logical one? Think of this example. According to the Economic Portfolio, over 9.7 million tons of food are wasted in Colombia per year alone. Now, with this amount of resources, we could feed over 11.8 million people living in conditions of famine. That's like the amount of people living in Belgium or Cuba for you to visualize. Now, I don't know about you, but wasting this amount of resources doesn't seem logical. Yes, many will argue that it is more practical, that giving away the food and creating an alternate system would only make things harder. Yet just because something is seen as hard doesn't mean it needs to be labeled as illogical. Empathy doesn't ride the same wavelength as these terms. And in fact, deciding that we shouldn't help others because of something as superficial as practicality or maybe expectation should never be taken into account. We should actually take a step to go beyond and create change, not seeing this as barriers placed in front of us. Now, there's a movie I really like called Freedom Riders, which tells the story of teacher Erin Gruwell, who helped 150 students in Long Beach, California. She used journal writing and literature to actually help her students combat an environment filled with violence, racism, and a lack of constitutional support. Now, the reason this story is so powerful is because Erin Gruwell, a young, privileged woman with a background completely opposite to her students, didn't just look at them and think, oh, all they need is a little bit of empathy. I'm just going to step into their shoes. No. She knew that what these people needed was something more. Hope. Actually being shown that they were worth teaching, that they were able to achieve things greater than their families had in generations, than their friends. Was this the most practical solution? Maybe not. But it was the most sustainable. Because only a year after Erin started teaching her students, the grade scales tripled. Many of the grades went from F's to C's, and that signifies progress. So, what we should be really asking ourselves isn't if these solutions are practical, but if they actually take into account these people's realities. Erin changed the curriculum, the types of books they were reading, but despite the fact it was different to the other groups, It was actually designed for her students' lives. And this is part of a thinking process that I invite you all to have. Ask questions. We answer dozens of them a day, ranging from what coffee flavor we want in the morning to making a decision at work. But do we actually take enough time to ask them? Question the origin of other people's realities. The power of questioning is not just that it leads us to finding the flaws, because this is the cycle of negativity that we should avoid. But what it does do is help us understand the background, answer the why. Why do we see these infinite cycles of injustices? Now, we've understood that empathy isn't just about pity or negativity and that it can be logical. With this, we are equipped with a type of problem solving that is not only compassionate, but is actually human, long-term, and sustainable. And that's empathy-based problem solving. It's used in the simple situations, but also in the most difficult ones. Think of a major tech company that has noticed productivity drops after coming back in from pandemic to full in-office hours. The management team began labeling employees as lazy and with a lack of discipline. But one manager chose to take a different approach, one that didn't start out in negativity and asked deeper questions. Why were people arriving late and tired to work? Why were most of those parents? Well, it turns out juggling taking your kids to school and coming back to work after almost 2 years isn't as easy as it seems. And here is where we can actually see the cycle of not just not looking at situations in a negative way, but of empathy actually being a catalyst for real problem solving. And through this, we see that this isn't softness. It's actually strategy. Empathy helped them ask the right questions. Logic designed the solution. And the outcome was sustainable, human, and long-term. Empathy does not start by looking at each other as others, but rather as people who are the same as us, but with different backgrounds, different lives. And it is from here that we can start to see change. Empathy is so much more than the common catchphrases that we are told. And because of this, I have grown to carry a hunger, not just to witness the world, but to actually understand it, to lean into its complexity, its beauty, its brokenness, to lend a hand, not out of pity, but out of recognition. Recognition that another person's reality is real and that it matters. Empathy is not just about softness or tears or good intentions. It is intelligence, power. It is the radical act of seeing somebody, not as a statistic or a stranger or even a simple story, but actually one that is worth telling. I believe empathy isn't the end of a sentence, but can be rather seen as the beginning of a question. A question that dares us to design better systems. Healthcare that heals without bankrupting. Schools that see humans, not machines. And work that actually gives people opportunities. It is here where we start to see change. Empathy is not just stepping into another person's shoes. It's actually having the intention to make a change when you're in them. This is the kind of empathy I will keep fighting for, not the kind of compassion alone, but the kind that reforms, rebuilds, and sustains. Not just for me, for all of us. I hope you'll fight for it too. Thank you.